audition, or your auditory sense, involves the ear for hearing and balance, which we call equilibrium. The ear is divided up into three major areas. So your external ear is basically what you see on the outside of your head, plus that canal that leads into the ear. The area in red here in the center is your middle ear, and then as we go beyond, we get to the internal ear or inner ear. Now the inner ear is involved with equilibrium as well as hearing, and you can see the external and middle are only involved with hearing. So we're going to go through each of these three parts on the upcoming slides and make sure you know all the structures and function of all of the parts in each of the three areas of the ear. We're going to go through the structures and function of the external ear. It involves the auricle, the external acoustic meatus, and the tympanic membrane. So here's the write-up for it. I'm going to explain these three structures and what's going on here on the next slide. All right, let's go through the parts and functions of the external ear. We have the auricle. The auricle acts like a funnel. It's also called the pinna, which acts like a funnel to funnel in sound waves, which enter this canal. Here it says ear canal, but we see the full name on the previous slide, the external acoustic meatus. It's funneling the sound waves to the end of the canal here. Inside the mucosa, or deep to the skin of the external acoustic meatus, we have, not labeled here, ceruminous glands. Ceruminous glands produce wax that trap particles to protect, well, the eardrum. The eardrum is the tympanic membrane, and it's the wall that divides the external ear on this side and the middle ear on the other side of the tympanic membrane. So when the sound wave comes in and strikes the tympanic membrane, which is the eardrum, it will then oscillate or vibrate back and forth at a specific frequency. Now we're in the middle ear. Could be called the tympanic cavity. We'll call it the middle ear. And we can see the players involved here, the pharyngotympanic tube or auditory tube. There's three ossicles, which are small bones, malleus, incus, and stapes. So we're going to explain these structures and their functions on the next slide where we have a picture. Well, the external ear ended right here, and the middle ear begins right here at the tympanic membrane. And we kind of left off our story with this tympanic membrane vibrating because a sound wave hit it. So now in the middle ear, we can see this little bone that's connected to the tympanic membrane. It's called malleus because it looks like a hammer, which articulates with the next little bone, which we call the incus. Incus means anvil. And then it's connected to a third small little bone that we call stapes, which means stirrup. So there's your three ossicles, auditory ossicles. Ossicles means tiny bones, and you should know them in order, starting at the tympanic membrane, malleus, incus, and stapes. So the point is, when the tympanic membrane is oscillating or vibrating because a sound wave struck it, well, that causes these ossicles to vibrate as well. And that transmits that sound, which was just a sound wave, right, into this mechanical energy of these bones vibrating back and forth. So the final ossicle, the stapes, is pounding on, when it's vibrating, it's pounding on the inner ear, which we haven't gotten to yet. One more important structure in the middle ear is this tube right here, the auditory tube, and that's there to equalize the pressure in the middle ear to the back of the throat. That's when you hear your ears pop or feel your ears pop if you're going up in elevation or down in elevation. The pressure is changing on the outside of you, which means we have to equal that pressure inside your middle ear. So there's your connection to the outside world, this pharyngotympanic tube, to help equalize the pressure. All right, before we get to the inner ear, we're going to go through just something that happens often in the middle ear infections, which we call otitis media. Otitis literally means ear inflammation. media for middle ear. So inflammation is a result of an infection. So here is your middle ear, so it becomes infected or inflamed. This happens in infants and children, mainly because their auditory tube is really small. And remember, this connects to the throat, so bacteria in their mouths and their throat can easily get up into this middle ear. And then, well, your body fights the infection, and that's why the white blood cells or pus will build up and will press up against the tympanic membrane. All this fluid is pressing up against the tympanic membrane, which means it can't vibrate properly because there's pressure on it. And if antibiotics won't drain it, well then sometimes a myringotomy will be performed, and that's where they put little tubes in the ears here. You might have heard of ear tubes in infants or children. They're tiny, tiny little tubes for that pressure just to escape out through the outside of the ear because it's not draining on its own. Now we're in the inner ear. So there's our stapes, part of the middle ear. That's the last ossicle, and when it's vibrating, it's banging on the inner ear here. It says 2 major divisions of internal ear, and then there's 3 regions here. So why does it say 2 major divisions? Well, it's just talking about hearing and balance or equilibrium. So hearing and equilibrium is how the inner ear is divided, and it does so through 3 regions. So let's just name them here. So we have this swirl area, kind of looks like a snail. That's the cochlea, and the cochlea is where the receptors for hearing are located. So you have this cochlear nerve leaving the cochlea. This central portion right here, this is called the vestibule, and that's what the stapes is banging on, right? The vestibule here. And the vestibule contains receptors for equilibrium. So here's your vestibular nerve coming out of the vestibule. And then these little arcs right here are called semicircular canals. And the semicircular canals contain little receptors that we see here for equilibrium as well. And it uses the cochlear nerve, which comes together, the vestibular nerve, which comes together with the cochlear nerve. And there's your cranial nerve 8, vestibulocochlear nerve, for hearing and for equilibrium. So just to divide up the 2 major divisions, hearing receptors are located in the cochlea. The other major division is equilibrium. Those receptors are located in 2 areas, the vestibule and the semicircular canals. All right, of the 3 parts to the inner ear, we're going to start with the cochlea, the swirly snail-looking structure. The cochlea is where the hearing receptors are located. So here's some of the structures in the cochlea, which we'll explain on the next slide that has pictures. But what's going to be important for us is the organ of Corti. Sometimes it's called the spinal organ or spiral organ, but we'll call it the organ of Corti. That's your receptor for hearing. And then we'll see these other structures, but I'm not too worried about the scallas, but the cochlear duct is going to be another important structure that's going to contain the organ of Corti. So let's go to the next slide where we can actually see these things and I'll explain them. So here you're looking at the cochlea, but instead of looking really swirly, they just unwound it just to kind of simplify what you're looking at. But just remember, this thing is coiled up quite a bit. So you remember the external ear, the sound waves coming in right here through that external acoustic meatus. It hits the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane vibrates. That makes these 3 ossicles vibrate or oscillate, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. So you have this mechanical energy now. It's like a little amplifier. That's your middle ear. So the final ossicle, the stapes, is pounding on, vibrating on what's called an oval window. The oval window is what kind of connects the stapes to the inner ear. So what happens, that causes this fluid inside the cochlea to vibrate. Just think if you're kind of vibrating water, you see that ripple of water kind of just extending out. So the vibration of the stapes on the oval window disrupts the fluid inside the cochlea. So this fluid will flow through this area here. It's called the scala vestibula. I'm not worried that you remember that. It's actually going to eventually make its way around to this other scala once you go around the apex here. Scala tympani, I'm not worried about that name. And pressure is dissipated out through the round window, right? So the oval window is where that vibration begins, right? And the round window is where it ends. But the important thing here is this center region, which you don't see the vibrations in. That's called important area of the cochlea. It's called the cochlear duct. So it's a duct inside the cochlea. And then these vibrations from the stapes pounding on the oval window may cause an indentation like you see right here. If that does happen, then the organ of Corti, the receptor for hearing that you don't see inside the cochlear duct, is disturbed, and it's going to send an impulse to the brain for you to perceive that sound. Now, that little indentation or disruption in the cochlear duct can happen anywhere along the cochlear duct. And that's how you perceive higher frequency pitches or lower frequency pitches, depends where that disturbance is on the cochlear duct. So that's kind of got a little ahead of myself. We'll see some more of that on the next few slides. But there's the story of hearing listed here, 1 through 4A, 4B, that we've covered so far. So here's what we covered on the previous slide, the cochlear duct. Remember, this is inside the cochlea. The cochlear duct contains the organ of Corti. That's the receptor for hearing. And then we'll see hair cells, stereocilia, tectoral membrane. So there's other structures involved here. So let's go to a picture again to just explain that organ of Corti, the receptor for hearing, in a little more detail. So now we're looking at a cross-section of the cochlea, and you can see those scalas on the either side of what we see here is the cochlear duct. So what's inside the cochlear duct? This structure right here, that's the organ of Corti. So we're going to take this structure right here and enlarge it. So we're just looking at one little section, one of the organ of Corti. So just imagine this cochlear duct getting disturbed. That's going to press this membrane down over these tiny little hairs. That membrane's called the tectoral membrane, and it's going to bend these little hair cells. See the little cilia-like things on these little cells here? That's what the organ of Corti is. So when these little hairs bend, that sends the impulse towards the brain to perceive the sound.